"Judge me on 4 things," said Trump. So he did. President Trump claims the news media isn't paying attention to real policy issues, like jobs, the economy, so-called Islamic State and the border. At some point the fake news will be forced to discuss our great jobs numbers, strong economy, success with ISIS, the border and so much else. He tweeted. 6 months into his presidency, how is he faring in these areas? And how much is he tweeting about these policy priorities? 1. Jobs. During the campaign, Mr. Trump vowed to create 25 million jobs over 10 years and become the greatest jobs president ever. In the past he discredited U.S. jobless figures, claiming the actual unemployment rate was over 40%. Now he's America's CEO, he's embracing the same figures he once described as phony. So, are the jobs numbers great, as his tweet suggests? Yes, the jobs market is looking healthy, with the overall trend showing that unemployment is falling. The president is also right when he says there are more jobs around. In June 222,000 jobs were created. But this steady economic performance isn't a drastic change from what we saw under President Barack Obama, when job growth increased at a steady pace. One area where that growth isn't being matched is in wages, and there have been calls for President Trump to address this issue. Media caption: "Where did Trump the outsourcing slayer go?" Then there's his promise to bring more jobs back to the U.S. from overseas, a pledge which energized much of his base. Shortly after his election victory he spoke of how he had saved 1,100 jobs with the Indiana-based air conditioner firm, Carrier. Months later, 600 of those jobs are still moving to Mexico. Other companies like Boeing and Ford are expanding production overseas, rather than in the U.S. Despite the president's assurances he would reverse what he described as job theft overseas, it's proving difficult. Trump's tweets, on fake news, 106, on jobs and economy, 131. 2. Economy. The latest growth figures, released since President Trump took office, showed a decline in the GDP rate, 1.4%, in the first 3 months of this year, compared with the 3 months preceding, 2.1%. It was one of the worst readings for nearly a year, but not necessarily bad news for President Trump, as economists say the first quarter of the year usually posts a lower rate. Media caption: "Fact-checking Trump's U.S. economy boasts." Overall, the president is correct when he characterizes the U.S. economy as strong. Upward growth is part of a trend, in which the U.S. economy has picked up since the financial crisis in 2008. The White House has set a growth target of 3%, but this does look like a challenge, as growth has only averaged less than 2% a year since 2001. The Congressional Budget Office currently estimates growth at about 1.9%. Media caption: "Trump, I just don't want a poor person running the U.S. economy." President Trump often boasts about how the stock market has risen since he took office. He can take credit for this in part. Some of the improvement in the markets can be attributed to anticipation that the president and the Republican pledge to reduce taxes and cut regulations will be implemented. But he's still not managed to pass tax reform laws. What will Trump's tax plan actually do? 3. Fighting Islamic State. Trump's tweet sequels on Islamic State 44. During the campaign Donald Trump didn't mince his words when it came to so-called Islamic State, famously using an expletive to describe how much bombing he would carry out. He added, "I'd just bomb those suckers. I'd blow up the pipes, I'd blow up the refineries, I'd blow up every single inch, there would be nothing left." Back then Mr. Trump was wary to reveal details but promised he had a secret plan. Since entering office, he has ordered a review of U.S. policy on IS. Despite criticizing his predecessor's handling of the militant group, he's the founder of ISIS. The Trump administration's strategy is strikingly similar. It includes continuing strikes and targeted raids, more support to local forces, and freezing the assets of his operatives. The goals are the same too: to take control of his strongholds like Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq, and coalition forces have already seen success in the latter. But there are some key differences in tactics. One is the decision to arm Syrian Kurds to help take Raqqa, despite objections from the Turkish government. The second is a tougher stance on annihilating his fighters, which has led to a rise in the number of civilian casualties caught up in attacks. The third is that the Trump administration is authorizing a far greater number of airstrikes as it makes its push, and has ramped up operations against IS in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia. In Afghanistan, his administration dropped the mother of all bombs to kill IS militants. And, when President Trump authorized a strike against a chemical weapons factory in Syria earlier this year, he showed he's not afraid to use military force when he feels it is necessary. It shows another key difference between him and his predecessor Barack Obama, who promised such action, but didn't deliver. 4. The border. Trump's tweets on the border, 70, on healthcare, 78. Securing America's borders was the centerpiece of Donald Trump's election pitch. At campaign rallies he promised to crack down on illegal immigrants in the U.S., with his focus on criminals. He often raised the case of Kate Steinle, a young woman from Seattle who was killed by an illegal immigrant who had been deported 5 times. 6 things that could topple Trump's wall. At the end of June he introduced Kate's Law, which would increase penalties for immigrants who re-enter the U.S. after they've been deported. It was passed by the House of Representatives, and will now come before the Senate. In the president's first 100 days, more than 41,000 people were arrested on the suspicion they were in the U.S. illegally, an increase on the previous year. About 10,800 had no criminal conviction, compared with 4,200 the previous year. Media caption: "Us immigration raids leave many afraid to open the door." But despite his tough talk on the issue, President Trump actually deported fewer people in his first 100 days than Barack Obama. In Trump's first 100 days, 54,564 people were deported, compared with 62,062 for the same time period in the previous year under his predecessor. And let's not forget Donald Trump's plans to tighten the border even further. His flagship plan to build a wall is moving along. Companies have until September to pitch their prototypes. At a recent rally in Iowa, the president said it could be a solar wall which would pay for itself. Media caption: "How will President Trump deliver on border wall promise?" For months the president's travel ban was blocked by the courts and failed to become law. After a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in June, it's partially in effect, but it's not as drastic. Visitors from the 6 designated countries can still enter, if they have a bona fide connection to the U.S.